Hello explorers and welcome to another video. Today we are going to do a manual install of Openstack. And this is going to be a video in multiple parts that I'm going to publish later on, and I will link to the playlist down below and also to the script I'm using today. Yes, so we are soon going to be done with this computer, but we have one detail left, and it's the most complex one and also one of the more important one. So when it comes to Openstack, you also need networks. So you run your instances, but the instances can be on different networks within the same deployment. So you can set up a virtual network for one customer and they have a bunch of instances running on that virtual network, and a separate virtual network that runs a bunch of instances for another customer. So in order to do that, we first off will create some database. So we will go into MySQL and supply the password here again for my user and into MySQL. The networking service is called Neutron, so I will call create Neutron database and also a Neutron user identified by QWERTY for the database. So now we have that database up and running. We will create a user in our Keystone infrastructure here called Neutron in the default domain, and we will use our standard password here for that user as well. We'll add the admin role for that Neutron service, and next up we will create a specific service. So in the project service we are admin, and we will create a service Neutron with the Openstack network, and we will call it network. So that's the service name. And we will create 3 endpoints, and one for the public network, one for the internal network, and one for the admin network for this network infrastructure piece. So now we have a service called network and 3 endpoints for that network service. And then we need some applications. So we need a Neutron server which handles all the deployments and so on. Then we have the plugin Ml2, and this is a newish thing. Before you had plugins for all the different implementations that you could have, but now they have one plugin for networking, and then you have different drivers for the different networking tasks. So you have one driver called Linux Bridge, which is the Linux Bridge agent, and we also have one Open vSwitch, which is a little bit newer one. The thing you can think about here is that OpenSwitch is newer, works in a little bit of a different way that requires more of your CPU and so on, but you have more options. You can configure it more, you can add more privileges and so on, and create more of an involved network. By Linux Bridge is using the Linux environment and creating IP tables and so on in order to do all the same work. So it has less functionality but is more stable for large employments and simpler. Then we have the L3 agent, we have the DHCP agent. The DHCP agent is to give you IP addresses, of course, and then you have Metadata Agent that handles all the metadata set on the different interfaces and so on. So that's all the things that we need to install, and it will take a little while here for it to install it, but first off we have a bunch of questions. We have already set up the database and we will initialize that later. We can again tell it about our RabbitMQ server here, and Openstack is the user, and QWERTY password. We don't set up the keystone, and we don't set up any endpoint catalog, and not set up any metadata. We'll do that manually. So now we just have to wait for this to be installed. Now we have the software installed, and networking is a little bit of a complex topic. So we have hundreds of lines here of configuration. Well, I will go through it all, but you can follow along in the write-up that we'll do as well, and we'll link in the description here, because I understand that it is a lot to do. So we will check the core plugin here, see that it is the Ml2 plugin. The auth strategy should be Keystone, as we have looked at before. Then we have, see if it's here, no, service plugins. Look for that, there we have it. So we need router, but I'm not gonna enable routing or QoS at the moment. So we just have the routing, transport, URL. I need to check that we have the Openstack set correctly there, the Rabbit connection. And then notify Nova on. We have two here, port status changes and port data changes. Both of those should be true. Then we need to set up our database connection. So database, see here, it's currently using a SQLite database, but we will change that up to use our MySQL database. So we have that. And as usual, we need to set up our Keystone auth token. So let's go down here and we'll remove a bunch of these here. So we have less things to worry about. And we will add the normal thing here, the auth URL, type password, default domain name for user and project, and region 1, project name service, and then Nova QWERTY as the, no, I copied the wrong one. Good that I checked. So that is the Nova block, so we need to have that as well. But what we will copy in here is this, of course. So we will have the same, pretty much the same thing, but we will have memcached server, and we will have the username and password for Neutron here. So this is what the block that we will copy in here. But down here you have a Nova block. So we will do pretty much the same with this Nova block, but we will copy in the part that I showed you recently here. So here we have this one, username Nova and QWERTY service and so on. So it's similar to the one above. The only thing is that we connect the Nova service instead. Then they want us to change this Oslo concurrency lock path. So this one, it wants me to change to using var lib neutron temp instead. I don't see a reason to not use this path, so I will keep it there. So that's that file. Then we need to configure the Ml2 config as well. So the Ml2 plugin. And in here, we want to look for the Ml2 block here. And in here, we will check for the type drivers, and we can add VLAN here to that as well. Tenant network type should be VXLAN. And mechanism drivers, they say OpenSwitch here. I will change that to Linux Bridge instead. Linux Bridge. And then here for extension service, I don't want any quality of service. I remove that. And then we go to Ml2 type flat. And down here, instead of external network, I will use provider. And all of this is from the documentation. And so there is a bunch of different ways you can configure your networks, but I'm doing the simplest setup now. So in the VXLAN here, we want to check the ranges, so it's 1 to 1,000. And then we go down to another block called security group. And in that block, we want to enable IPset. So we'll see that IPset is enabled here. So that's what we want to do in the plugin. Next up, we will go into the Linux Bridge agent ini file. And here we want to check the physical mappings, interface mappings. and it's not set at the moment, but I will set my physical mapping to my single driver here. So I have one port or one card in the system, so I will have that as my physical interface. It's not required because I have been able to run it without, but it's very much recommended to have at least 2 networks on your machine, and 3 would be of course better, so you can have one for the public, one for the internal, and one for the admin network. So more interfaces is good for your network, but I'm only having one. And then we need to go down to VXLAN and do some configurations of the VXLAN block. And in here we want to enable VXLAN. We want to check for the local IP address and set that to our server IP address. And then we also want to look for the L2 population, and we want to enable that. So, we have one more section here. We want to go to the security group section as well and add a firewall driver. So here we want to add the IP tables firewall driver, so we can handle that, and then enable security group is something that we want to do as well. Now that we have enabled the firewall driver for IP tables, we want to install the module in our kernel, brNetFilter, and that will give us the possibility to use IP tables as a bridge. So here we will check for netBridge, bridge, NF call IP tables, and IP tables 6, and both of these should be set to 1. And then we have that functionality. Then we need to go into the L3 agent and configure that. And here we want to look for the interface driver. It's set to OpenSwitch at the moment, so let's change that to Linux bridge. And we can go out again. Then we go into the DHCP agent. And again, we have an interface driver here that is using OpenSwitch. Change that to Linux bridge. And we want to look for the DHCP driver down here, and we want to enable that DNS mask driver, and we want to enable isolated metadata. I think we saw it down here. Enable isolated metadata. So that should be true, but it's already true, so we don't have to do anything there. Save that, and then second to last we will go into the metadata agent, and here we want to set our metadata host, and that should be our current IP here. Could have copied it in, but I didn't. And then we want to set the metadata proxy shared secret. And this is something that will be shared with Nova, so it can talk to Nova in a secret way. So this is pretty much a password between them. So they are using the same key. So that is what we set up in the metadata service. And then we will go into the Nova configuration and set up Neutron there and use that password. So we go down to the Neutron block here, and here I will do similar to what I've done before, and remove a bunch of this, and then copy paste in this configuration. So we have an auth URL, which is the keystone auth URL, auth type password, project and user domain is default, region name region 1, service name, service, project name service, and then Neutron and QWERTY. Then we have this service metadata proxy is true, and metadata proxy shared secret is that password that we just used. So now Neutron can talk to the metadata service, or Nova can talk to the metadata service of Neutron. So now we are done with the configuration. That was a lot. Now we need to set up the database for Neutron. So we have the Neutron DB manage, And we have the config file for Neutron and the config file for the Ml2 plugin. Upgrade head Neutron. So that's the way we are updating the database and migrating it to the latest version. So now we have upgraded the database. So now I will restart all the Neutron services. So I restart the why? Paste that in here. So I will restart the Neutron API, the L3 agent, the Metadata Agent, the DHCP agent, the Linux Bridge 8, and then the RPC server. So I restart all the Neutron services. So they will have the new configuration that we have supplied. And then I will enable all those so they will start on boot up. So we have all those services available if we restart the system. And last but not least, after we have enabled all of these, I will restart the Nova services as well. So they will take up this new configuration and can use the metadata service in a good way. So now all those services are restarted. So now we should be able to go into our web GUI and set up a network for ourselves and do some other check around a little bit, because now we have installed the full controller unit. Next up we will install the compute node and figure out and test it out a bit. So the system information here is old, so if we reload that page we should get more services available to us. And as I said before, these policy files that I haven't updated, there are 6 different policy files with thousands of lines of documentation and configuration options. And if they aren't correct, then you will be logged out and you will have things that you're not allowed to access. But if we see here, we have all our services, so there's 6 services in total. We have the compute service here, Neutron Skeleton. We have this center block storage service, and we have the network agent that we also can see here. Metadata definitions, I think we are allowed to see it, but for some reason the cookie is not saved in the browser, or the session is not saved correctly in memcached. The defaults, we should have more defaults now. Before we only saw one default for volumes, I believe, but now we can see that we have defaults for compute quotas. So how many virtual CPUs we have? 20. That's a lot. I will only have 1, but there is a bunch of these quotas that you can change, of course. And then we have volumes, how many volumes you can have, and network quotas, and so on. Under compute, we can see hypervisors. And at the moment we don't have any hypervisors, but we can see that it has the information here. So if we add compute host, we will get the information up here. Flavors are how large your different instances could be. So you can have small, medium, large, and so on, and decide on how many CPUs and so on should be in each flavor. Volumes, I've talked about that, could create volumes and snapshots and so on that. And network, let's create a network for the admin project. So let's see here, perhaps I will go into this instead, and we will create a network. Let's call this net1. And we will enable admin state, enable subnet, and we will be in the availability zone of Nova. And the subnet should be subnet1, and I will give it 10.0.0.0/24, so a full DNet or something like that, CNET. And then we have no gateway IP. It will get the 10.0.0.1 as gateway IP if we don't supply it. And we don't add any extra here, we just enable the DHCP. So that will be our network. And Wait a while, and there it has created a network. So now we can install instances on this specific network, but first we need a compute node. This was what I wanted to show for you today. I hope that you found this interesting. I hope that you learned something today. If you have an Openstack implementation running already, leave a comment in the comment section down below. And especially if there is a specific service that you feel is more complicated and something that you can't really wrap your head around and you want me to dig deeper into that service, then leave a comment about that in the comment section as well. If you haven't subscribed yet, please do that. If you like this video, give it a like, share it with your friends and colleagues, and I really hope to see you in the next video.